The setting sun over Los Angeles turned the tranquil suburb where I had into golden brilliance. Against the kitchen window, I absently dried a dish with a rag that had existed longer than myself. Almost hypnotic from the mechanical movement of my hands was a little consolation in the boredom of my daily life. Mark would have to ask about his day, and I would have to fake that the sound of his key turning in the lock did not calm me but filled me with great apprehension instead of relief. Then something seized my attention. A male pulled groceries from his car across the street. Younger, maybe in his early 30s, that he moved with a relaxed poise, gave him dark, swept hair and a small build. Of course, I'd seen him previously. Although he had moved in several weeks ago, I had never really paid any attention. Till now. There was something in the way he didn't quite stretch, his shirt riding up just enough to reveal a strip of skin, that made my breath catch. Though that was difficult to ignore, it was not the physicality itself. It was how alive he seemed. Thus present in a manner not seen for years. I shrugged my head, dismissing the notion. I was a married woman, what was I doing, gazing at some stranger like some love-struck teenager? A middle-aged woman with a good life, a beautiful house, and a husband who adores me. At the very least, I judged he did so. That love, however, had begun to seem a pattern, a well-trodden path we both traveled a little together. The man, whom I recalled from the moving vehicle, looked up, his eyes seemed to sense my presence. Our eyes met and the planet stopped for an instant. Though it was a surprise to me that I could not clarify, his smile was bright red, more of a blush. With my heart thumping in my chest, I let the dishcloth fall, my hands abruptly awkwardly, and dashed off out of view. I leaned against the counter trying to control my breathing. What was amiss with me? Just a glimpse of an instant. It had, nevertheless, roused something very inside of me, something I had not sensed for many years. A flame off the rail. Desire? Curiosity? I was uninformed. I only knew it made me feel alive first in years. Opening the front door creak pulled me from my daydream. Mark came back. Smiling, I rose to welcome him, but looking at his well-known face, the chin stubble, and the lines at the corners of his eyes from sleeplessness made me have some unease I couldn't quite identify. Loneliness, possibly. Or remorse. Bending down to kiss my cheek, he said, "Hi, darling." Dry, mechanical peck. "Tell me about your day." "Fine," I mechanically answered, although the words seemed hollow. "Yours?" Already on his way to the living room, he shrugged. Same old, same old." I stood and saw him go, feeling that customary chest discomfort. We would spend several hours conversing about everything under the sun. We were two strangers occupying the same space, but not living it now. It felt like we were just going through the motions. I couldn't help but look across the road as I rolled back towards the window. Kurt was not around, but his grin resonated in my head, a strange echo of something I didn't appreciate I understood. Something it turns out I didn't know I needed to know. Still, I knew. Internally I knew. This is the start of something. Something that would change the whole fact map. The other days were a blur of monotony and anger. I attempted to erase the memory of Kurt's smile from my mind, but it remained like a splinter, stubbornly refusing to be removed. I would always find myself staring across the street, hoping for Kurt to show up every time I passed the window. More frequently, he did so. He was constantly engaged, whether watering the flowers on his front porch, working on his car, or simply perched on the stairs with a book. He had a silent intensity and a direction I respected. He appeared quite comfortable in his skin and assured of himself. It was convincing. When I was taking out the rubbish once in the late afternoon, I noticed him. His brow furrowed in attention, he was battling with a big potted plant. I second-guessed myself, then dragged myself there. At last, did not it was the least neighborly thing to do? Need a hand? I shouted, my voice unnaturally happy sounding in my ears. Startled, he glanced up and then grinned that same brief, embarrassed grin I had suffered. And hello. Yeah, absolutely, good. This object is more massive than it might seem. Setting the trash bag down, I grasped one side of the pot and assisted him in getting it onto the porch. My body shook when our hands briefly brushed. Praying he had not seen, I yanked my hand fast off. Thanks, he muttered, rubbing his fingers against his jeans. Kurt is me, as a side note. Becky, I said still, though I realized that he had probably already known. Good to at last meet you. He leaned against the railing, his blue eyes set on me, similarly. So you living here, how long have you been? About 15 years, I stated somewhat self-consciously. It's in a nice neighborhood. Good for families, you understand? He nodded, but for an instant, I saw something odd on his face, possibly curiosity. I see. I recently relocated from San Francisco. Needed a respite from everything. Ah, well, you have surely discovered it now, I mocked. Nothing much occurring here. He answered, his eyes fixed on me in a manner that caused my face to flush. Sometimes, it is not all that bad. Whatever it was you were doing, in every case I should let you to. Thanks very much for assisting. Anytime, I responded, though the words were full of meaning I wasn't yet equipped to justify. Something had changed, and I couldn't help but sense it as I headed home. That small talk had awakened something inside me that I had not experienced for ages. Though present, not all of it was attractive. It was the way he gazed at me as if he noticed me. The person under, as well as the middle-aged woman living in the settled life and warm house. The person I was once. Entering, Mark was seated in the living room, glancing at the TV. I scarcely raised my head as I came in. I felt that former agony in my front once more. How had we arrived here, so distant? Sitting down by him, I tried to come up with something to say, but nothing would compute. Rather, I couldn't help but think of Kurt, the way his grin was the most alive I had been in years. I knew it was wrong. But first, for too long, I didn't care. Over the next few weeks, there was a flurry of furtive looks and informal encounters. Whenever we saw one another, Kurt and I would smile genuinely or offer a passing hi, but there was always this unspoken sense of something more. Attention neither of us mentioned but couldn't run away. I had been watering my front yard's plants the evening I met him. It was about when he arrived walking home from a run. His sweat shimmering his skin in the gloaming, he was not wearing any shirt. An instant heat surge made me red-faced. I tried to avert my gaze, but as he slowed to a walk and showed signs of muscularity, I could not help following the etchings on his muscles. Hello, Becky, he hollered with a somewhat breathless and friendly tone. Good night, was it? Yeah, I responded, my voice sounding foreign to my ears. This is great. Wiping his face with a towel, he stopped a couple of feet from the place. You should come sometime running with me. It gives much clarity to your head. Though it came out more nervous than I meant, I laughed. You're too quick for me. With a smile, he added, you seem to be full of vim. The way he'd said it, with that evil glint in his eyes, turned my belly inside out. Was he sweet-talking me? Or was I simply projecting my desires onto him and getting creative in my approach? I responded something, you might be trying to sound cool. He had responded, his eyes fixed on me for just a fraction longer before he headed toward the home. I will give it some thought. See you around, Becky. I was excited and ashamed as I stood there watching him go away. Relatedness came as I felt noticed for the first time in several years. Needed. And guilt, since I was aware I could not be feeling this way. I did marry. I was living happily married. But did I still love him? And what did he do? Lying beside Mark that evening, Kurt was all I could think of. The way he gazed at me, the way I felt while I was around him. I realized it was bad, kind of like it was Still, it was also addicting. And I felt alive first time in quite some time. The day we had agreed to go arrived at last, and I was filled with a mix of excitement and fear. I had agreed with Kurt's request to stroll in the park before my brain could block it. Standing before the mirror now, trying to determine what to put on, I was once more a teenager, nervous and excited at once. A plain sundress was what I decided on. It would make me pretty with little effort. With my heart thumping in my chest, I walked to the park. What was I doing? Insanity. This was quite insane. I was a wife. I had chores and a life. All of those thoughts just disappeared, however, as I saw Kurt sitting under the tree canopy. "Hi," he answered, a smile across his face. "Attractive." With a surge of heat, I answered, "You don't look half bad yourself." We walked off, the conversation flowing between us. He shared with me his San Francisco life and aspirations for starting his own company. More than I would have with a person in years, I found myself relaxing with him and letting out stuff I hadn't even acknowledged I had been keeping back. We sat side by side on a bench, the tension between us thick and genuine as the sun sank under the horizon. I could sense he was staring at me, and when I turned to see him, the strength of his gaze knocked me breathless. "Becky," he quietly said, his voice just air. "Even if this may sound nuts, I simply can't seem to get you off my head." My own heart was pounding so hard that I knew he must be able to hear it. I realize you also think," I said, the words falling out before I could halt myself. And then, before I could think better of it, I leaned forward and kissed him. It was impulsive, stupid, and all I didn't know I required. His fingers were as light as they caressed my face, his lips soft against mine. For a second, the world disappeared, and we were lost to each other going under. But as we departed, reality slammed my face down. I was married. What had I done? I had a husband, a lifetime. Staring into Kurt's eyes, however, I couldn't help but feel that I should not be sorry for what I had just done. I stammered, "I don't know what this is, but I know I cannot merely exit it." He nodded gravely. "And so could I. I also don't want you to. Still, I want you to realize that this in any case. This is honest to me." As I came to grasp the immense scope of what I was living, tears started at the edges of my eyes. This wasn't an evening of being drunk or fleeing the monotony of my life. This had been missing long, this was unique. I realized nothing would ever do either as I strolled home that evening. I had gone past a boundary, so there was no return. But for the first time in a long time I was truly alive. And I couldn't ignore this. The days that followed were a whirlwind of emotions. I felt guilt, yes, but also a sense of euphoria I hadn't experienced in years. Kurt and I continued to see each other, our connection deepening with each passing day. But as much as I tried to push it to the back of my mind, the reality of my situation loomed over me like a dark cloud. Mark had started to notice something was off. He'd ask me if I was okay if something was bothering me. I'd brush him off, telling him I was just tired, but the truth was, I didn't know how to tell him. How do you tell someone you've spent your life with that you've fallen for someone else? One evening, as we sat down to dinner, Mark looked at me with a seriousness I hadn't seen in years. "Becky, we need to talk." My heart sank. I knew what was coming. "Okay," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I know something's been going on with you," he said, his tone gentle but firm. "And I need you to be honest with me. Are you seeing someone else?" I felt a lump form in my throat as I looked at him, the man I'd spent my life with. The man who had been my rock, my partner, my everything. And yet, as I opened my mouth to speak, I knew that the truth would change everything. "Yes," I admitted, the word feeling like a weight lifted off my chest. "I'm sorry, Mark. I never meant for this to happen, but I can't keep lying to you." He looked at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. And then, to my surprise, he nodded. "I think I've known for a while," he said quietly. I just didn't want to believe it. Tears streamed down my face as I realized the enormity of what I'd done. I had hurt the man I loved, the man who had stood by me through everything. And yet, as much as I regretted the pain I'd caused, I couldn't bring myself to regret the connection I'd found with Kurt. In the weeks that followed, Mark and I began the painful process of untangling our lives. It was hard, messy, and heartbreaking. But through it all, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was the right thing to do. Not just for me, but for both of us. As for Kurt, our relationship continued to grow, deepening in ways I hadn't thought possible. He was everything I hadn't known I needed, passionate, attentive, and unafraid to show his emotions. But more than that, he made me feel alive in a way I hadn't in years. In the end, I realized that this wasn't just about Kurt. It was about me. About rediscovering who I was, what I wanted, and what I deserved. It was about finding the courage to take a chance, even when it meant risking everything. As I stood on the precipice of this new chapter in my life, I knew one thing for certain: I was finally ready to live. Thank you for listening. Did you like these infidelity stories? Drop a comment below if you want part 2. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications for more cheating wife stories.